Good morning, colleagues. Hi. Good morning, colleagues. Hi. One of the outcomes of this particular gathering is the declaration, the Toluca Cape Town Declaration. We will be displaying the declaration, and on that would be the QR code. The QR code would allow you then to comment on the declaration. You would notice that it is short. It is as succinct as we could possibly make it, because we want everybody to remember what we are committing to or what we are declaring. Okay, we don't want to have a thesis where we forget what's in the document.
Thank you, Reggie. And today, after seeing what happened yesterday during the reception, we ordered such good weather, people were outside. So today we changed the order that it should be a little bit rainy so you could guys get into the tent during the gala dinner. On that note, I will kick off this conference, the discussion part, with the session we call 2A in the program. And the theme or the title of the session is Social Justice, Advancing Inclusivity, Decolonization, and Demarginalization. And of course, this session will explore the concepts of social justice in a movement that seeks to be more inclusive and results in decolonization and demarginalization. And this, of course, is kind of worked out well being here at UCT, being this campus being one of the campuses in South Africa where students really push for the universities to decolonize the curriculum. So this is the rightful place for us to have this discussion. Our setup of this morning session, as most of the sessions thereafter, is that we will have a keynote speaker, and then the panelists will also do a short presentation, and then largely my job is to just ask, do you have any questions, and then ask the panelists to answer. I am not asking any questions. And on that note, I will call on our keynote speaker today, which is Professor Kasturi Pehali-Leek, who's the Dean of the Center for Higher Education here at University of Cape Town. And I'm not gonna read all her accolades, is there as part of the profile, and then I will call on you now to start your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning to you. Good morning, all. You've realized that a greeting is not a rhetorical act in Africa. It's a participatory, it's an invitation. Good morning, all. A warm welcome to all of you, to UCT and to Cape Town. Your presence here from all over the world shows such a deep commitment to promoting the thematic focus of the conference, that is, creating social justice to advance research as a public good. Thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to share my thoughts on decolonization, demarginalization, and inclusivity as social justice imperatives. Let me also thank Linda Smith, I'm not sure if she's in the room, for her heartfelt keynote yesterday, which was profound in its authenticity. I feel honored to be part of this DOA summit. The work in my faculty, the Center for Higher Education Development, is keenly and deeply linked to this ethos in its attention to making the goods of the university accessible for staff and students through a social justice approach to transformative pedagogies and curriculum change. The opening ceremony yesterday reflected the warmth, hospitality, creativity, and collaborative spirit that is Africa. You saw the African archive in action. Some parts might have affirmed your ideas and associations with Africa, the dance, the music, the rhythm, and talent, and some parts might have disrupted your sensibility about Africa and the paradigm it's been placed in, such as opera singers singing in an African language. In my talk today, I draw on this archive. Not just because we are right here in Africa, but because Africa is a continuous site of struggle and a place from where I speak. In Manyola's words, Africa is my locus of enunciation. As a scholar, I'm keenly interested in the politics of representation, archives, and their curation. The archive is not neutral. It reflects the priorities and power structures of those who curate it. Each of us carries the archive in us. Let's test what's in the living archive in the room right now. Please turn to the person next to you and share what comes to mind when you hear the word Africa. Go. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Given my 30 minutes, this exercise, when I decided to do it, was going to be a runaway train. And I'm asking the train now to stop at the station. All right, thank you. Thank you. A living archive needs the right intentionality to change perspectives on primary sources, to heed Ngugi wa Thiong'a's call to represent, recenter, and remember the version of truth that supports a more holistic rendition of how people are represented, self-presented, constructed, and positioned. For many of us in South Africa, 30 years after democracy, we are still grappling with core questions. What does it mean to place Africa at the center of our epistemic worlds? What does it mean to be African? In the video you're about to see, we will engage with a curated construction of a cultural text that attempts to answer this ontological question. South Africans have had mixed reactions to this text, but I invite you to view it as an artifact that engages with and perhaps confirms or disrupts notions of South Africa, writ Africa, that live in this room.
I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frosts and in our latter-day snows. It has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. The crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lashed by startling lightning, have been a cause both of trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veld. The dramatic shapes of the dragon's back, the soil-colored waters of the Ligwa, Iqeli, Notugel, and the sands of the Kalahari have all been panels of the set on the natural stage on which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. At times, and in fear, I have wondered whether I should concede equal citizenship of our country to the leopard and the lion, the elephant and the springbok, the hyena, the black mamba, and the pestilential mosquito. A human presence among all of these, a feature on the face of our native land just defined, I know that none dare challenge me when I say I am an African. I am the grandchild of the warrior men and women that incense Kukuni land. Patriots at Tetwayo and Pepu took to battle. The soldiers Mushweshwe and Gumunyane taught never to dishonor the cause of freedom. I am the child of Nongause. I am he who made it possible to trade in the world markets in diamonds and gold and the same food for which our stomachs yearn. Being part of all of these people, and in the knowledge that none dares contest that assertion, I shall claim that I'm an African. Today, it feels good to be an African.
There is no doubt that meanings are influenced hugely by representation in the form of stereotypes or new conceptions. When Western agencies curate African narratives, they often reproduce colonial stereotypes or reductive tropes of Africanness that serve external agendas rather than reflecting the lived realities of the continent. This can lead to Africa being framed as peripheral to modernity, or a land of deficit and scarcity, or an unspoiled exotic other, busy with safari tourism and cultural mysticism. Both of these essentialize Africa and strip it of its nuance. If Africa's narratives are framed with reductionist Western epistemologies, then African scholars, artists, and storytellers must reclaim control and reframe how Africa is understood, both locally and globally, through their research. Achille Mbembe's concept of the archive as a site of power underscores how the process of selection and exclusion creates dominant narratives while silencing others. When Mbembe asks, curated by whom, for what purpose, he invites us to think critically about who controls Africa's stories and to challenge the use of these representations to perpetuate colonial power structures. Similarly, publishing houses and editorial boards hold significant power in determining what knowledge becomes visible and valued. Through these practices, forms of epistemic injustice are perpetuated based on their entrenchment in Western-centric frameworks and hierarchies. The DOA movement is thus a critical one, and the call to action for scholarly content to become more accessible to all is a socially inclusive imperative. The importance of reflecting how universities as sites of knowledge production can foster equity in scholarly communication cannot be overemphasized. Making scholarly content accessible strengthens the global collective to address grand challenges such as environmental crises and public health emergencies. My contribution today is to challenge us to not only consider the accessibility of research, but to also emphasize the importance of the substantive content and purpose of that research. Accessibility alone may not be sufficient without ensuring the relevant value and purpose of research, which should address systemic inequities, particularly for underrepresented groups. The question of research substance, i.e., what we write about and what we research, is important as part of the decolonization movement because it is one way to promote epistemic justice. As an academic, I see research and scholarly communication as far more than a vehicle for academic achievement and career progression. It is a means to serve society, and as such bears an ethical and social justice axiology. Writing is a means for the colonial subject to know and to heal. Through writing and research in this way, we see that knowledge is not a commodity to be bought and sold to the highest bidder. I want to share with you my earliest memories and relationship with knowledge as a commodity, when my parents gifted us books on special occasions. I was born in Durban, South Africa, to fourth-generation Indian parents who lived in a small, semi-industrial zone suburb called Clearwood, established under colonial rule. Indians arrived in South Africa in 1880 as immigrant indentured laborers to white owners of sugarcane plantations. My memory of the first 5 years of my life is captured in black and white photographs that tell a colorful story of a life creatively curated by indigent parents who navigated challenges aggravated by inequality, discrimination, poverty, marginalization, and alienation, all of which was justified by racial coding. Despite the lack of material resources, my upbringing was enriched by cultural imprints, religious traditions, and community experiences. Financial, political, social, and educational challenges limited and determined our career choices and shaped my entry into higher education 25 odd years ago. These imprints continue to influence the roles I take up in educational development and university leadership locally and globally today. Books symbolized more than entertainment to me. They represented the power of knowledge. The instruction from our parents to go study, read your books, was a rite of passage where mastering books became a proxy for a ticket to escape invisibility and poverty, promising upward mobility and hope, or so we thought. Encyclopedias, in particular, symbolized worldliness and sophisticated knowledge. Often paid for in monthly installments and displayed prominently in cabinets in living rooms, these volumes were memorialized as markers of status and aspirations for upward mobility. Rooted in the Greek idea of general education, Encyclopedia Britannica presented a compendium of Western knowledge, complete with maps, illustrations, and bibliographies. These encyclopedias were powerful colonial tools. Our parents unknowingly introduced us to books that carried colonial legacies. These books chronicled Europe's conquests and cultural dominance, all the while masking the reader's own position within these narratives. As a child, I consumed these texts naively, unaware of how they implicated me as a colonized subject. These texts were steeped in a curated narrative of the world that excluded my reality. But as Chimamanda Adichie cautions, there is grave danger when books tell a single story of the world. Fictional works transported us to foreign lands with snow, princesses, wizards, far removed from our local context. Books like these positioned readers as voyeurs, presenting foreign cultures as exotic and romanticized. In school, we were further exposed to texts in English that reinforced these colonial tropes. These stories were not our stories. They excluded people who looked like us or reflected our experiences. These texts provided an escape from our modest lives. They foregrounded the West's visibility while rendering our own stories invisible. And what was our obsession with general knowledge quizzes and spelling competitions? All of which was centered on testing our knowledge of Europe and the North, rather than the South African realities we lived in. By doing so, they subtly reinforced the colonial hierarchy of knowledge, shaping our perceptions in ways that made us feel othered. For a young, impressionable reader between the ages of 6 and 13, these texts offered me alluring but alien frames of reference, subtly instilling a sense of inferiority. Even though some texts, and I mean in different cultural and media content, have been adapted in recent times to represent people of color, questions like, why are we not good enough, still arise as we grapple with the enduring colonial question of what it means to be human and who gets to adopt this identity. Frantz Fanon notes that those in the zone of non-being experience life aggravated by race and prejudice, contrasting with those in the zone of being. This divide is mirrored in colonial research and publishing practices, which curate knowledge for elites, perpetuating systemic inequalities. As students, we encountered increasingly sophisticated knowledge systems in universities, which Mahmoud Mamdani described as tools of the civilizing mission. Dominant languages gained complexity and depth, while other languages were confined to folklore. Ngugi wa Thiong'o asserts that erasing a people's language erases their memory, disconnecting them from their history and culture. Most global research disseminated in English, reinforces linguistic and epistemic borders, excluding alternate knowledge systems. When I joined academia, I witnessed the evolution of the colonial encyclopedias into modern repositories like Wikipedia, Google, and AI tools like ChatGPT. These platforms, backed by research funding and gatekeeping institutions, commodify knowledge and enforce compliance through disciplinary frameworks. Our encounter with AI currently highlights how entrenched hegemonic stereotypes persist in knowledge production. As a child growing up under apartheid and colonialism, like many others, my identity, personhood, and sense of self were curated for me rather than by me. Retrospectively, I see how colonial texts and practices from childhood to academia alienated us from our sense of self, leaving us with the ongoing challenge of navigating a double consciousness. For much of my life, I existed as a product of external curation, unable to exercise agency over my own representation. Only later did I reclaim the role of curator over my own ontological and autobiographical narrative. It is this background and context that shapes my work as an activist scholar now, and the reason why decolonization, sometimes used synonymously with social justice, is not a metaphor, according to Tuck and Yang, or a proxy for superficial change. As an activist scholar, I collaborate with others to strengthen academic identities and disrupt outdated research traditions by urging academics to approach their work with deep social awareness, as if God were a human rights activist. With my postgraduate students, I promote empirical content being used to highlight gaps, silences, and systemic challenges in the global South, and to point to their solutions. This is a social justice orientation to research, but as Thuli Madonsela reminds us, it must go beyond the rhetoric to amplify the voices, challenges, and solutions of the South for the South. Social justice is intricately intertwined with economic, political, and distributive justice. Our research should be measured by its contribution to equity, resource distribution, and solutions that uplift the masses out of poverty, inequality, and injustice. But this is difficult to do because the metrics used by universities, publishing houses, and journal editorial boards are driven by the competitive, profit-driven models that uphold the guise of research advancement. Advancing activist scholarship benefits everyone, but disrupting entrenched knowledge systems through scholar activism remains undervalued in academic review process, leaving individual scholars to shoulder the burden while we abandon our collective responsibility. In the spirit of Ubuntu, which translates as I am because we are, the collective is essential for growth, and together we must strengthen relationships as transformative agents for meaningful change. Being with as a core principle to Ubuntu offers a compelling framework for reimagining Africa as a space of interdependence, resilience, and relationality. Linda Smith, in her work, subsumes Western anthropological tools into Maori to advance anthropological research that affirms local people's knowledge, local people who know what is good and bad for them better than any other researcher. On the continent, The SAN Code of Ethics establishes the rights of indigenous communities and their participation in research as an act of ethics and an act of care. When knowledge from peripheral regions is rendered invisible, De Sousa Santos calls this abyssal thinking. I am very aware that I'm overstepping now in terms of time, so I'm trying to do a quick audit here of what I can go to next. Please bear with me. I do love telling my stories in pictures, so hopefully as I go through the photo story for the rest of this, you get a sense of what the narrative would have been had they given us more time. But no, I do understand. So Hontonji speaks about extroversion as a way that, in the way that knowledge from Africa is extracted. But he balances that with endogeneity. So if African publishing houses had to dig into African solutions, African ways of being, we would be able to balance the injustice that exists in terms of the research that is available globally. We have spoken about this, the rose must fall and fees must fall movements. I just have to say, on this campus, it was indeed a very traumatic experience. We hadn't realized in 2015 just how colonial universities are until students disrupted our notions of what epistemes do and how they alienate and how they marginalize. So I think I'll end with this to say that publishing industry's role, as all of you have echoed and acknowledged and identified, is huge. This is about changing the systems that don't serve us. And as you read across that slide, I want to say the stakes are high. If we fail to disrupt these systems, we perpetuate a colonial legacy that marginalizes the very voices that academia claims to serve. I would like to end with this. So I would have said something about how to decolonize the library. And I want to end with this. It is a new humanism that we have to create together. We need an intentional solidarity. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you.
I almost feel like a villain having to cut you off. Thank you, Professor Kasturi, for asking us, for making us think that in order to decolonize the science system, we need to remember, we need to recenter, we need to reimagine the science system. And hopefully in the next day or so, we will be doing this. I will call on our next speaker, Dr. Esther Juliana Vargas Arbelayez, who will give us a little bit of a feel on this same topic. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for being here. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for this very much interesting summit. And I also want to thank the University of Cape Town for hosting it. I have learned very much. Thank you. También quiero agradecer a Ariana Becerril y Eduardo Aguado por la confianza en que la filosofía tiene algo que decir, aportar en estas discusiones sobre acceso abierto y en general. También quiero agradecer al GT en Bienes Comunes del Conocimiento de Claxo, en el que mis preocupaciones sobre acceso abierto desde la filosofía han tenido un ambiente de discusión. Is the translation working good? Okay. Okay. Let's see. Entonces, bueno, Primero que nada, quiero explicar que yo soy filósofa y desde la filosofía es que estoy abordando estos problemas sobre los que me invitaron muy amablemente a hablar el día de hoy. Entonces van a encontrar una postura, o más bien un abordaje muy conceptual y ojalá no les resulte muy aburrido después de la presentación tan fascinante que tuvimos hace un momento. Entonces, el objeto de esta presentación, a la que he llamado Formación y Ciencia Abierta de las disposiciones a la apropiación, es preguntarme, el objeto de esta presentación es abordar el asunto de la ciencia abierta no solo como un problema de disposiciones institucionales para el desarrollo de la ciencia abierta, sino también en relación con los desafíos que enfrenta este asunto en relación con la apropiación de lo que se dispone en abierto. Concretamente me referiré a los desafíos que se plantean en la relación con la formación de una ciudadanía crítica y científicamente educada para el aprovechamiento de lo dispuesto en abierto y la relación de estos elementos con la comprensión del conocimiento como un bien común. En esta presentación tiene como lugar de enunciación la filosofía política. Para ello, en un primer momento se explorará la necesidad, desde el punto de vista conceptual, de vincular la justicia social en perspectiva de John Rawls con el enfoque de las capacidades que los sujetos tienen para su realización, como lo ha teorizado la filósofa Martha Nussbaum. Luego exploraré cómo se vincula esto con el problema de la formación y finalmente haré unos comentarios relativos al vínculo entre estos elementos con el asunto de los comunes del conocimiento. Bien, por costumbre y por profesión, el problema del acceso abierto y con ello también de la ciencia abierta lo he trabajado sobre todo desde los conceptos, que en lugar de trabajarlo desde los mecanismos que hacen realidad esta importante iniciativa. Esta presentación no es la excepción. Iniciaré con dos conceptos que desde la filosofía política pueden ayudar a dar luces sobre el problema de la ciencia abierta como un bien común. Estos conceptos son los de justicia social y capacidades. Con el primer concepto, justicia social, se puede resumir uno de los grandes aportes del filósofo John Rawls. Este autor, preocupado por comprender las formas políticas contemporáneas, explica que si bien el problema de la justicia es central para entender las relaciones de los sujetos entre sí y de ellos con la idea de lo colectivo, esto no se podría completar solo apelando a la forma institucional de la política. En sus palabras, ahí está la cita, nuestro tema es el de la justicia social. Para nosotros el objeto de la justicia, dice Rawls, es la estructura básica de la sociedad, más exactamente el modo en que las instituciones sociales más importantes distribuyen los derechos y deberes fundamentales y determinan la división de las ventajas provenientes de la cooperación social. Por instituciones más importantes entiendo, dice Rawls, la constitución política y las principales disposiciones económicas y sociales. No se preocupen que voy a llegar al tema de acceso abierto con estos conceptos en un ratito. Pero lo que me interesa de esta perspectiva de Rawls es que está pensando cómo funciona la estructura política para pensar la colectividad. Y entonces, como ven ahí, básicamente lo que él nos dice es que sí se necesitan instituciones fuertes que digamos, organicen la cooperación social. Este autor expone una profunda preocupación por el fundamento de tales instituciones políticas, es decir, expone la preocupación por la legitimidad que otorgan los sujetos a las instituciones y el reconocimiento de que ellas son justas. Y al tiempo nos indica que son las instituciones precisamente las encargadas de hacer posible de manera sistemática y organizada la justicia con legitimidad social. Por supuesto, esto en un plano teórico. La preocupación de Rawls es cómo efectivamente se da la legitimidad. En otras palabras, la justicia social depende de las instituciones que la estabilizan y disponen los mecanismos para la distribución equitativa del bienestar, pero también precisamente para ser calificadas como socialmente justas, dependen del reconocimiento que los sujetos hacen de su legitimidad. Me gustaría aquí hacer un paralelo entre la preocupación por las instituciones políticas, que es la preocupación de Rawls, con las instituciones del conocimiento, más concretamente con las instituciones de los comunes del conocimiento, identificables con los mecanismos de acceso abierto al conocimiento. Aquí debo decir que este es un salto en el que, voy a hacer un salto, no me voy a detener en la razón por la que entiendo que acceso abierto es una institución de los comunes del conocimiento, pero si les llega a interesar, pues hay algunas publicaciones en español sobre este tema que he desarrollado antes. Pero el asunto es que, digamos, desde una perspectiva de la filosofía política, encuentro que acceso abierto funciona como un condensador institucional de prácticas de los comunes del conocimiento. Bien. Estos mecanismos, los mecanismos institucionales de los comunes del conocimiento, revistas en abierto, repositorios abiertos, políticas de acceso abierto y de ciencia abierta, etcétera, estabilizan y distribuyen el conocimiento científico de calidad. Por otra parte, ¿quién les otorga legitimidad? Que es la misma pregunta que Rawls se hace para las instituciones políticas. ¿Quién les otorga legitimidad a las instituciones o a las instituciones de los bienes comunes del conocimiento? Esta pregunta también tiene sus frentes prósperos de trabajo. No solo tenemos los estándares convencionales mainstream de medición de calidad, sino que por suerte también somos testigos de enormes avances en métricas alternativas y en críticas a las fórmulas cienciométricas del mainstream. Sin embargo, todavía parece que faltarán elementos en esta constelación de avances en la ciencia abierta. Le podríamos preguntar tanto a Rawls como a las instituciones de los comunes del conocimiento si la legitimidad es suficiente o si los alcances de la legitimidad son suficientes hasta ahora. ¿Quiénes legitiman? ¿Qué capacidades tenemos los sujetos comunes y corrientes para ponderar lo que es legítimo? Quiero decir, los sujetos que estamos en la academia, pero también los que están fuera de la academia, para entender, para evaluar, para ponderar lo que es legítimo. Más aún, ¿cuáles son los alcances de la usabilidad de un sistema justo o que pretende ser justo y que cuenta con cierto grado de legitimidad? A la luz de estas preguntas, podríamos decir que la apuesta por la ciencia abierta no solo pasa por las disposiciones institucionales, por supuesto indispensables para su desarrollo y sobre todo para el cumplimiento de su propósito. Se requiere además una buena formación de una ciudadanía capacitada para reconocer, valorar y sobre todo apropiarse del acervo científico y cultural que se encuentra a disposición gracias a las iniciativas institucionales y políticas de ciencia abierta. En este punto, creo que el enfoque de las capacidades de Martha Nussbaum es pertinente. Esta filósofa, altamente trabajada en los círculos intelectuales educativos, pone el foco en el bienestar real del que pueden gozar los sujetos en la sociedad. Esta idea supone justicia social, ciertamente, pero sobre todo supone la reivindicación de la libertad a partir de la extensión del desarrollo de las capacidades de una persona, tanto en lo relativo a las determinaciones externas que dispone la sociedad a un sujeto para su desenvolvimiento, es decir, lo que la sociedad favorece para que el sujeto desarrolle sus capacidades. Esto lo llama, Nussbaum lo llama capacidades combinadas, como también desde las capacidades internas del sujeto, esto es, las características de una persona, las herramientas que tiene como persona a su disposición, lo que la persona puede hacer desde sí misma. Lo interesante de este planteamiento es que el autor, para mí, es que la autora pone el acento no solo en la estructura institucional, en la infraestructura que asegure la justicia social, sino que se detiene en la posibilidad real que tiene cada uno de los sujetos para el goce pleno y efectivo de la justicia. En otras palabras, pone el acento en la formación de las capacidades de los sujetos. Me gustaría enfatizar que lo que estoy diciendo aquí sobre formación no atañe solamente a la formación de personas que están que manejan sistemas de información, no solamente los bibliotecarios, los archivistas, bueno, las personas de las ciencias de la información, sino que me refiero a la formación de todos los ciudadanos, porque no basta con tener un gran acervo científico a disposición si no sabemos qué hacer con él, los ciudadanos. Volviendo al paralelismo que he planteado atrás, podríamos decir que la necesidad de la formación en capacidades es un asunto central en el desarrollo de la ciencia abierta. Sobre este punto, ya hace una década, Luis Reigadas afirmaba que vivíamos un momento muy próspero para el acceso abierto, especialmente en América Latina. Pero, y en esto concentra su análisis, la disposición de mecanismos, piensa él, la disposición de mecanismos de acceso abierto no es suficiente. Traje una cita muy extensa del texto de Reigadas, me voy a permitir leerla. Él dice: la región enfrenta amenazas para el carácter común del conocimiento. Persisten enormes desigualdades sociales y educativas. De poco serviría que el acceso abierto al conocimiento beneficiara solo o principalmente al sector de la población latinoamericana que ya tiene los recursos económicos o culturales para acceder a todo tipo de bienes cognitivos. El reto, dice él, es incluir a los sectores con mayores desventajas. En los países industrializados, la discusión sobre bienes comunes del conocimiento ha puesto el acento en el libre acceso y en los mecanismos institucionales de regulación del mismo. Sin descuidar este aspecto, en América Latina, yo también agregaría en el sur global, el énfasis debe ponerse en políticas de inclusión que permitan que los sectores históricamente excluidos participen de este bien común que les resulta ajeno. Bueno, hasta ahí la cita de Reigadas. Es interesante que además de pensar la apertura epistemológica a otras formas de producción y circulación del conocimiento científico, es un tema muy interesante, pero no voy a hablar de eso acá, este autor llama la atención sobre las condiciones de posibilidad reales, particularmente para América Latina, para que todos los sujetos puedan apropiar el acervo científico ya disponible en abierto. Entonces, aquí un pequeño comentario. Digamos, la justicia epistémica pensada desde quienes hacen la ciencia es muy importante, pero hoy quiero invitarles, o bueno, dejar en el ambiente la preocupación por pensar también la justicia epistémica desde quienes usan la información, desde quienes se benefician de los avances de la ciencia, pero no son científicos. En este lado, digamos, de la dinámica de la circulación de la información, el problema no es solamente la reivindicación de los contextos, la reivindicación de las epistemes, la reivindicación de las formas propias de producción del conocimiento, sino que creo yo que también es importante estar capacitados para entender y para jugar un rol en la ciencia que existe, con o sin reivindicaciones epistémicas. No sé si me explico, pero es como que la ciencia sea para todos de verdad, toda la ciencia, no solamente la producida desde los contextos locales, sino toda la ciencia. Bueno, esto también es justicia social y esto también está en coherencia con las recomendaciones de ciencia abierta de UNESCO, particularmente en los aspectos 4 y 5 de la finalidad y objetivos de la recomendación de política de la ciencia abierta. En el documento dice que se debe invertir en recursos humanos, formación, educación, alfabetización digital y desarrollo de capacidades para la ciencia abierta, y que se debe fomentar una cultura de la ciencia abierta y armonizar los incentivos en favor de la ciencia abierta. Bueno, eso dice en el documento. Esto plantea enormes desafíos en varios niveles que están recogidos allí. En el nivel de la política pública de las naciones, en el nivel de la implementación de esa política pública en las instituciones de educación superior, o bueno, en las instituciones educativas en general, y en el nivel de las apuestas curriculares, no solo de los programas de ciencias de información, bibliotecología y archivística, sino en todos los programas académicos como parte de una formación básica. Hace muchos años, cuando empecé a ser profesora, empecé enseñando lógica a estudiantes de derecho. Y ellos se molestaban mucho conmigo porque no querían, decían, pero ¿esto para qué me sirve? Y al cabo entendieron que estudiar lógica favorece la estructuración del razonamiento para su ejercicio profesional. Análogamente creo que, bueno, ellos estudiaban lógica en el ciclo básico de formación. Análogamente creo que esto debería suceder con la formación en ciencia abierta, debería ser parte del ciclo básico de formación, independientemente del área disciplinar en el que nos encontremos. De lo contrario es como tener, no sé, un tesoro escondido porque nadie lo puede ver, es decir, nadie que no sepa dónde está el tesoro lo puede ver. Allá. Ahora, no he terminado esta parte. Esto plantea varios desafíos, ya lo dije. Incorporar estas dimensiones de la ciencia abierta aterrizaría la idea de la formación en capacidades científicas para el aprovechamiento de los diferentes componentes de la ciencia abierta. Ahora bien, ¿qué tiene que ver esto con los comunes del conocimiento? He visto a lo largo de estos días, bueno, y a lo largo de las lecturas, que casi nunca se usa la expresión comunes del conocimiento y en vez de eso estamos usando la expresión conocimiento público. Como filósofa, a mí me da un poco de vergüenza ser filósofa en este contexto. Como filósofa creo que ahí tenemos una limitación conceptual. Voy a explicar por qué. Ciertamente hablar de bienes comunes implica un intrincado marco teórico que nos ha mostrado especialmente a partir de los estudios de Laval y Dardot, que estudiaron mucho el problema de los comunes, que la expresión comunes es un término equívoco comprendido de formas diferentes. Para pensar los comunes del conocimiento, honrando la línea de trabajo de Ostrom y la de Negri, me he apegado a la definición de los comunes como disposición política. Esto quiere decir, muy sintéticamente, que a diferencia de un bien público, que está determinado en muy gran medida por aspectos formales de propiedad, el bien común supera e incluso está por fuera del asunto de la propiedad para ser pensado como una posición política frente a un bien. Autores como Negri, que ya lo mencioné, y otros, han mostrado que lo común no es una característica intrínseca de los bienes, sino que se trata de una decisión colectiva. Un bien común no depende solo de quién es el dueño de ese bien, sino sobre todo de cómo nos relacionamos con ese bien. Esta idea de relación supone que la carga del sentido de lo común no solo está en la determinación o disposición de propiedad, que por cierto está decidida con mecanismos institucionales, sino que está en igual o mayor medida en la capacidad de los sujetos para hacer uso del bien. Son decisiones sobre la usabilidad del bien. Quizá valga la pena detenernos un poco en esta diferencia conceptual. Un bien público es de todos, lo cual supone un alcance de propiedad. Precisamente es de todos, hay un genitivo implicado. En los estados constitucionales esto supone que el bien público tiene una propiedad colectiva condensada en el estado soberano. Consecuentemente, la carga de la categoría y el cuidado del bien está en la institución política. No obstante, hemos visto que la institución no basta para el desarrollo y prosperidad de un bien común, por ejemplo, el bien común del conocimiento. Por el contrario, hace falta algo más, una ciudadanía comprometida con la legitimidad y la apropiación del bien, del conocimiento como un bien colectivo, no en términos de propiedad, sino en términos de comprensión, usabilidad, en última instancia, de formación crítica de la relación con ese bien, con lo cual, consecuentemente, se puede tomar una posición política sobre ese bien, independientemente del asunto de la propiedad. Por ello, y con esto cierro la presentación, espero que haya tiempo. La formación en capacidades para una ciudadanía científicamente competente para apropiar los recursos abiertos es indispensable para que abrir la ciencia tenga sentido efectivamente, pero también en relación con la idea de la defensa del conocimiento como un bien común, como posición política que favorezca la justicia social. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you so much for, again, bringing us back to social justice, and especially from that quotation you have that open access should not benefit groups who are already advantaged economically, culturally, or are already resourced. It should be centered towards social justice. My next speaker is Professor Mari Sudli-Tuvi, Chief Executive of Research Council of Norway.
Good morning. Again. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. A great pleasure to be here, to be part of this very, very important summit here in Cape Town to explore the diamond open access through the lens of social justice and focusing on a publishing system which is free from both conscious and unconscious biases. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your hospitality. I want to thank particularly also the keynote speakers from the offset. It's been so powerful to be listening, especially both to Linda Tuiwai-Smith yesterday and also Kasturi Bahari Leaks today. Thank you very much. Extremely powerful and important work that you are doing. Access to reading and publishing research, that is the cornerstone of building knowledge, of justice itself, of development, and to reaching just and sustainable societies. So it's our duty to ensure that it's conducted in a manner which is fair, which is inclusive, and which is accessible to all. So equity in research means providing equal opportunities for all individuals to participate in and benefit from scientific endeavors. And this involves breaking down barriers that prevent access to resources, to education, and to participation in society. We must ensure that all voices are heard and that everyone has the opportunity to contribute. In our pursuit of social justice, we must recognize the systemic inequalities that do exist in our societies and globally. These inequalities, as we've heard over and over again also in these sessions, they're often deeply rooted in historical contexts and continue to affect communities, peoples, and regions all over the world. And the pursuit towards open access in science initially brought great optimism for better dissemination and access to scholarship. There was an emphasis on research as a public good and advocacy for a bidirectional flow of knowledge between the researchers, research institutions, and different regions. Unfortunately, on the way, business models related to open access publishing, such as article processing charges, or APCs, and transformative agreements have led to new challenges of scholarship and the exclusion of research voices. We must be mindful of how, even well-meaning, open science initiatives can have also adverse effects, entrenching or exacerbating existing inequalities. We therefore need to listen to those who are at risk of further marginalization and let ourselves be inspired by Southern interventions in open science, such as community-based seed banks, open source hardware projects, and open access publishing initiatives of the South American continent. And also, I think the very, very inspiring interventions that we've heard throughout the sessions here speak very much to that. The Global Summit in Toluca, Mexico, 1 year ago, has affirmed the need to recognize research output as a public good, as we also just heard before I went on stage. A significant outcome was the unanimous support for rejecting article processing charges, APCs, and shifting in focus towards Diamond Open Access. Diamond Open Access is a scholarly communication model in which research outputs are openly available without charging fees to either authors or readers. In this model, all content-related elements are led and owned by the scholarly communities themselves. Diamond Open Access publishing and decolonization are closely linked through the principles of equity and of inclusivity. Decolonization in scholarly communication involves challenging and changing the structures and practices rooted in the colonialism that still affect societies today. This includes recognizing and valuing indigenous knowledge and perspectives, ensuring that research is relevant and accessible to all communities, and giving power and resources back to those who have been marginalized. At our event at the UN Science Summit in New York in September with Science Europe and RCN, the dialogue explored the critical importance of freedom to carry out research, equitable access to scientific information, and research infrastructures while considering science as a public good. Science Europe is dedicated to promoting open science and Diamond Open Access as an integral part of an effective research system. We believe that open science is not just about making research outputs freely available, but also about creating an inclusive and collaborative research culture. This means involving societal actors in the research process and ensuring that the benefits of research are shared equitably. We strongly support the principles of fairness and reciprocity and the work to ensure that all research communities can participate in this transition. Science Europe has recently launched a practical guide on how our members can support diversity in research environments. It's called Practical Guide to Supporting Diversity in Research Environments, and is what you see here. And it emphasizes the role of diversity in enhancing research quality and research impact, and the responsibility of research organizations to ensure fair and inclusive systems. More specifically, the guide explores the meaning of diversity for research organizations and highlights the importance of combating bias, discrimination, and unfair treatment. It emphasizes the need for a broadened understanding of diversity, encompassing factors such as disabilities, social background, and ethnicity in addition to gender. The guide outlines measures that research organizations can implement to support diversity, such as targeted actions for underrepresented groups and monitoring effectiveness of these measures. By embracing these practices, we can enhance the quality and impact of research while promoting a fair and supportive environment for all researchers. Science Europe's commitment to open science is deeply intertwined with such principles of fairness and equity. We believe that the transition to open practices should be inclusive, allowing all research communities to participate and ensuring that all segments of society benefit from open science. An open research culture promotes transparency, the ability to reuse and build upon research, and enhances reproducibility. Science Europe aims to raise awareness and promote open science at a global level to policymakers and to society at large. This includes providing input to European legislation and global and European policy and funding mechanisms that shape the research landscape. We have also conducted a comprehensive survey to gain deeper insights into the strategic approaches of our members towards open science, including their research assessment, monitoring, and evidence gathering activities. Nearly all Science Europe members have adopted strategic approaches to open science, which include policies and practices such as open access to research publications, fair data, open infrastructures, stakeholder engagement, open source research software, and citizen science. Science Europe members have implemented open science monitoring mechanisms and evidence gathering activities to guide policy development and support measures. These mechanisms primarily focus on tracking open access to research publications and fair data. The findings from this survey highlight that Science Europe members closely associate open science with research quality and impact. While open science is seen as a means to enhance research quality and integrity, its connection to promoting equality, diversity, and inclusiveness is also strongly recognized. We aim to advocate for equitable open science practices and open access in international forums such as the UNESCO and the Global Research Council, and provide input to European legislation and global policy mechanisms that shape the research landscape. Science Europe is strongly promoting Diamond Open Access and has taken a lead in initiatives such as the OA Diamond Journal Study, the Action Plan for Diamond OA, and the organization of the Global Summit on Diamond Open Access, which we're at right now. Science Europe is actively involved in the launch of the European Diamond Capacity Hub that will take place in January 2025. The EDCH aims to support the Diamond Open Access community in Europe by providing coordination, sustainability, training modules, technical tools, and services at scale. This initiative addresses the need for capacity building within the Diamond Open Access community and promotes a sustainable, community-driven scholarly communication ecosystem. Also, the Almasi project will be launched in January 2025, and Almasi stands for Aligning and Mutualizing Non-Profit Open Access Publishing Services Internationally. This is an EU-funded initiative that will foster collaboration between Latin American, African, and European partners to develop a non-profit, high-quality, and sustainable scholarly communication ecosystem. The Almasi project aims to create an inclusive framework for scholarly publishing that spans these three regions, promoting equity and accessibility in research. The UNESCO consultation on launching a global alliance for Diamond Open Access has received about 1,300 responses from both the Global North and the Global South. The survey aims to gather insights to shape a collaborative framework that dismantles barriers to publicly funded research. The framework supports global collaboration and equity in knowledge sharing, empowering individuals and communities worldwide, and the results will be shared with us here at the Global Summit. To sum up, I would like to share some reflections about reciprocity that was discussed at the UN Science Summit in New York. To achieve reciprocity in multilateral research collaborations, we must challenge our current ways of collaborating and go beyond existing models of operation. This requires a radical shift in perspective, where we place people and their diverse backgrounds at the center of equitable partnerships. Partnerships should be guided by fundamental principles such as trust, dignity, inclusion, respect, mutual learning, and shared responsibility. Building and maintaining relationships in trustful environments requires time and efforts, and it's not easy. So we must take that time, and we must take that effort. We must be patient and committed to the process, recognizing that true collaboration and co-creation can only happen at the speed of trust. By fostering an environment of mutual respect and understanding, we can create partnerships that are not only effective, but are also sustainable in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for such a lovely talk. And of course, with RNCN and the NRF goes a long way. And of course, the statement you made on challenging the way we do partnership, because we know we've been doing partnership for a long time, even on open access, and we still haven't gotten it to work. So we need to do things differently and let different people take the lead, hopefully, to lead Diamond in the right path. I will call on my next speaker, Dr. Al-Walid Al-Kahaj from the National Library of Qatar. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to first thank the organizers for this privilege and honor to be here today. And part of this event, which I hope will be a pivotal in our journey to open access to knowledge. The question of equity is something I personally think about all the time. Sometimes it actually keeps me up at night where I'm thinking, how can we make this work? And I've been working with open access for the last 14 years in different roles, from a scientist perspective to a publisher's perspective to a librarian, but always as an open access advocate, because I do believe that open access is key. But I believe after the summit, I will have to be looking at this more from a human rights perspective and a social justice perspective, which is something I need to look into more. So coming here and talking about Diamond open access is challenging for me, because I have personally mixed feelings about it. I've had experiences with them in the open access, which I'll talk about later on, but I really, really want to know how can we globally make it work. And that's something I'm really excited to be here in this summit, but also to learn from everybody here and how can we make it work. And what I'll be talking about today is Qatar's perspective, what we have done, what we're doing. So I will start with somewhat of like a case study, but it will end up with some open questions and also a rant in a sense. So to give an understanding of where we're coming from and what we do, I'll talk about Qatar's research landscape. Now, Qatar is relatively small in geography and population. We're about 3 million. We only have about 6,000 researchers or RD personnel, 30 universities and research centers. So Qatar is very invested in education and research, but also our output is relatively manageable, I would say. I wouldn't say call it low, but it's manageable. So about 6,000, 7,000 articles per year. We have 4 open repositories, 13 open access journals, and just to mention the QRDIC, which is the National Research Funding Agency, is one body. Now, I work here in this building. This is the Qatar National Library, so I do hope that you have a chance to visit one day if you haven't done so far. Well, I wasn't sure what that was, but what I want to show is some pictures of the library. So just to understand our perspective. So this is the main library, it's a public library. So Qatar National Library has various functions. We're a public library, we're a national library, and we're also a research library. So this picture here shows the main collection. That's part of the main library. We also have a heritage library, so we collect documents and archive documents about Qatar and the region. We have a children's library, which can be very noisy sometimes. And the books can get sticky for some reason, I don't know why. But we also host conferences. I should put the forum conference, but we also have exhibitions and special events. So this is probably my favorite event or series of events. We host the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra in the library once a month. So we're not a quiet library. So the mission of QNL is to preserve the nation's and region's heritage and enable the people of Qatar to positively influence society by creating an exceptional environment for learning and discovery. And when it comes to research, we see this as part of our cultural heritage. And when our question is basically, how can we make Qatar's research accessible and instantly available? Now, just to let you know, I'm also a photographer, which I'm going to put pictures of cameras and pictures of anything I can, in any chance I can do. But with that in mind, a couple of years ago, back in 2015, we started what we call the Open Access Fund, which evolved into an open access program. Now, the objectives of the program is to cover open access publishing costs for Qatar-based researchers. And, this is very important, to create and contribute to the permanent archives of Qatar-based research at QNL. So the idea that in 100 years' time, people can access what we consider as heritage. Now, why even have a fund? I mean, stating the obvious, but Qatar-based researchers want their research to be open access. But the choice of making something open access is dependent on the availability of funds. And in general, there's a lack of institutional support in Qatar for open access. And I can imagine this is the same case in many different countries and institutions. But there's also a general lack of research funding or sufficient funding from research grant agencies. Now, many researchers in Qatar have to pay from their own pocket, which is something that the program is aiming to avoid. Now, how do we process these payments? Well, we have agreements, read and publish agreements. We have agreements with fully gold open access publishers, but we also have a set budget aside for kind of ad hoc requests, which we call the OAF, the Open Access Fund itself. Now, we're not doing this alone. We're doing this as part of a consortium in Qatar, which consists of 10 plus universities and institutions who are cost sharing. And the idea here is that we want to shift cost, make it more sustainable as a whole. Because when we're negotiating as a consortium, we're actually spending a lot of money, but we're spending less overall. And we are creating, by read and publish agreements, we're creating this fund. So basically, we have all these agreements, we get all these tokens, and our team basically then distributes the tokens in the country. But our goal is to make a higher impact. And just some numbers. Since we've been doing this in 2016, we've had over 10,000 funding requests, and we've supported almost 6,000 articles. And yeah, the numbers are quite positive. Now, I mentioned in the beginning, or just not in the beginning, but something about the building an archive. So one other program that we're doing is something called the Manara Qatar Research Repository. And this is a national research repository, which is a service by QNL, but for every Qatar-based researcher. Anybody who's a researcher in Qatar can benefit from this, as well as institutions. Now, Manara in Arabic means lighthouse. And the idea here is that Manara will be like a lighthouse of knowledge, bringing people and discovering what the country has produced. And again, the Manara is to digitally capture and preserve all research-created outputs in Qatar, both traditional and non-traditional, and to provide access. So it's not enough that we just want the metadata to be there, but we want people to actually access it and read it and reuse it when possible. We also see it as a way or a home for research in Arabic, and something called what we're doing is legacy archiving. The universities in Qatar sometimes are changing, the landscape is changing. Some universities come in, are set up for a couple of years and then leave. So we want to create a permanent archive of all the research that's been created there. And one thing just before I talk about the rant, we're also providing Manara as an infrastructure solution. Now, apart from Qatar University, which is the main university, and I mentioned that's 30 plus, none of the others have institutional repositories. So what we're doing as QNL is providing infrastructure for them to use. So anybody or any institution that wants a repository can set up their own institutional repository as a layer in Manara. And we have done this with HBKU, Hamad bin Khalifa University, and the University of Doha and Science Technology. And so far, we have 7,000 items with 180,000 views and 115,000 downloads. So it's quite encouraging, and that's going to push us to do more. So when it comes to open access and the program and Manara, we are seeing the benefits. We're doing this based on the mission of the library, of course, but we're really keen on putting all the licenses for example, everything would need to have an open license, because we really believe that the content then can be translated into Arabic, because most of it is in English. We believe that we can create open education resources using the content. We are pushing to get more data in there, so we want more transparency. But the idea is not only an archive, but a hub that people can then go in, reuse the content, and benefit. But today, of course, we're talking about social justice. And that, again, makes me think, what is justice when it comes to open access? What is equity? What is fair? And I've talked about some of our, let's say, achievements. We're still ongoing, right? We're not there yet, but we're doing something. And again, what we're doing doesn't mean that it works for some other country or other institution, but it's what works for us right now. The point is, it's working for us right now, but because we do have challenges. We have many challenges when it comes to open access. So I don't want to come here and say, yes, we have accomplished, but we're still in the beginning of our journey, and we can see the challenges near. So when it comes to the open access agreements, they can be expensive, right? They're not cheap. And We keep getting emails from publishers every couple of months. By the way, our 2025 prices are going up, and this happens, and we don't understand why, and it's not the percentage of inflation is much higher. So it's getting expensive and expensive. The other thing is that the agreements, so I'm part of the team that negotiates the agreements, and they get more complicated every year. Publishers add more things, and it's getting very complicated. But the terms are not always equitable. They're not always fair. And sometimes with QNL, we feel like we're stirring kind of discussions when it comes to publishers, and we're surprised that, wait, how come nobody else questioned what the terms of the agreements are? And I'll just give you an example. We've negotiated a multi-year agreement with one of the big 5 publishers, and it took us a year to negotiate one clause. So this publisher said, as QNL, and this is basically an example of injustice, I would say. They said, QNL will need to make sure that whoever uses the content is not on the blacklist of the US, UN, UK, or Germany, or EU. And on one hand, we thought, how is that manageable? We can't just go and ask and check. That's impossible. Of course, there's the whole issue of sovereignty in there, but practically, it doesn't work. And to an extent, it's unfair for us to talk in a negotiation and say, that's colonial language there. And that's what we said. The lawyer wasn't happy, and the call ended. But another issue is that we always ask that nothing in the agreement overrides Qatar copyright law. Now, Qatar copyright law is 22 years old. It doesn't have fair use, it doesn't even have the word digital, but it's a matter of principle. So whenever we have an agreement, and we see this other countries, they accept national law, so why not accept ours? And this is a principle that we have, and it took us with another agreement 1 year also just to get them to agree to it. And they've called in their big legal kind of representative saying, we will never have this. 3 weeks later, we had it. So it's a matter of kind of, I guess, pushing for what we want. There's also lack of transparency between publishers. What we get as an agreement may not necessarily what others get. Now, luckily, there are initiatives such as the ISAC community where we have benefited from others publishing their agreements. We've looked at what happens in Germany, what happens in Hungary, and we say, well, we want this. Now, sometimes it works, and sometimes the publishers say, you can't do that. And our question is, well, why not? But this is something that is a struggle for us. So we managed to get some agreements in place, but it's not easy. But we really have to be mindful of what is going around, and this is where community and talking with each other really helps. Now, of course, besides the agreements, we have limited budgets, and the demand for open access publishing exceeds what we can supply, or what we have. And basically, the other issue is that there's limited cost sharing between institutions. Each institution is set with certain budgets, and they can't go above and beyond based on the demand of open access, and also the higher costs, which publishers keep giving us. Now, more budgets is needed, of course, but what happens is that we're putting more money into the read and publish agreements and starting to, unfortunately, not support enough the fully gold publishing agreements. So we have some, but we have to make choices. And this is something that is against our values because we believe that we should be supporting all business models and not just one. But then again, this is the limitation of budgets. Now, this is something that keeps me up at night. I do read publisher-author agreements, and I want to say that we're not happy with how some publishers are, and I put it misusing, because it's legal, but for us it's not in the spirit of open access, and how they use the CC/BY, non-commercial and non-commercial non-derivative licenses. Now let me give you, kind of clarify what I mean. So in some publishers, when an author signs an NC or an ND license, they're actually assigning all the rights. And then the publisher publishes it as an open access. but it's the publisher who has commercial rights, not the author. And this is what we mean by not in the spirit of open access. And this is especially true right now, where we hear a lot of publishers, for example, licensing or giving their content for AI or training. So they have commercial rights, and we believe that the author should have it. Now, I don't know how we're going to fix that, but for our side, we reject anything that is not compliant with the spirit of open access. So we push for CC BY. But the thing is, as we can see it from our perspective, we're moving away from a subscription access problem, which we still have, and we have in many countries, to an open access publishing problem. It means that only those who actually have budgets to publish open access can publish open access, and this is an issue. And I'm not sure how it will work long term. As I said, we have limited budgets, and we're making decisions, and we're rejecting more than we can accept. So it is a publishing problem. It's not fair that 3 years ago authors can have 3 articles funded by us, but now it's 1. So we're making difficult decisions. There's also the problem with a sustainable business model for Diamond and the experience in Qatar. I'm not going to go too much into details, but I used to be a publisher, and I had the unfortunate kind of task by my manager to go and talk to 7 or I think 8 editors-in-chiefs and telling them, well, if your institution cannot come up with the money now, then we have to close the journal. And we've archived so many journals because the business model did not work. There wasn't a continuous flow of money to the institution, which meant the journal had to close down. This is essential. I think business models need to be kind of addressed. Now, in general, not in Qatar, but in the region as a whole, we need to support more open infrastructure. We rely on non-profit services that help us publish, whether it's be like the publishing platforms such with the PQP or Redlick or, for example, like DOAJ and etc. We rely on them. So we need to support them more. And the thing is, if they don't get enough support or funding, then I don't want us to imagine a world without them, because the world without them is just commercial solutions. And that's not something we want. Again, one thing that we need in the region is more support in publications in Arabic. Most of the publications that are published right now are in English. And this is especially an issue for the social sciences and humanities, where they're asked to publish in English, but we need more journals in Arabic. We need more publications that support Arabic. Hopefully, or luckily right now with the licenses we can translate, but of course the translation has costs. One thing that I would like to mention is that for us, open access is not only open access to research, but it's also open access to cultural heritage. So as Qatar National Library, we are trying to work with different institutions worldwide to get back, repatriate content that is related to Qatar and the region back into our Qatar Digital Library. Now, one thing that is not something that we don't, or something that we don't like, is that many institutions are saying, yeah, great, you can have a digital copy, but they claim copyright, and they would license it to us in copyright, which is quite, I would say, unfair. I think that's the case with many culture institutions where they claim copyright over digitized material is not something that we support. And we believe that if something is public domain, then the digital copy should also be public domain. Lastly, I want to say that open access is not a destination. It's a guiding principle. We don't know what the final destination looks like. But I think that we're all here together, we're all hand in hand, we're working together and finding what that destination would look like. But it is a guiding principle. As long as you have your principle, and as long as it's a value of yours, I'm sure we'll get there. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you in Qatar. So thanks so much.
Thank you for that presentation and touching on and really making us think about the challenges of the current model, whereas the previous speakers, if you think of knowledge in a social justice way, in a public good or common good such of way, is not, the value is not built on the good, is not determined on the good, it's just that the good has to be provided. So we need to think of knowledge in that way. Our next speaker is Mr. Madana from DST, Center for Policy in Indian Institute of Science.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Madan. I'm a librarian by profession. I practiced librarianship in academic and research libraries in India for more than 25 years. My research interests focus on on the interface of scientometrics and science policy, and I'm an advocate for open access to scholarly information, at least since the year 2000. So it's more than 25 years. I've been observing the developments in the field, so probably I'll be sharing more of frustrations rather than the hope, for the past, what has happened in the past nearly 25 years in the area of open access. So I'm going to talk about the problems, the priorities, essentially the open access community had over the past 25 years and its impact largely on the scholarly communication in general is what I would like to discuss and focus in my talk. The past 25 years, clearly, in the name of inclusion, the entire movement has supported the development of publishers, I would like to say. The moment you include publishers in an open access discussion, automatically others are excluded. Always, we have been always saying that it is, when it comes to publishers, it is always a heads I win, tails you lose game for them. I don't see any benefit it has happened when we include publishers in the open access discussions, but this is what has happened. So let's imagine a world that the entire scholarly communication system has changed into the APC model. So where the revenue, the volume business model in which every paper is a quantum of revenue to a publisher. So ideally, no paper will be rejected in that scenario. In print, at least for the space and other reasons, if you submit a paper to a journal, there is every chance that the paper might get rejected. But in this scenario, in the web-wide world, in the web-wide scholarly communication scenario, and particularly the business model is based on the number of papers a journal accepts, in which so all papers are going to get published in the publisher's ecosystem. So if you have $2,000, then there are some journals that will publish your paper. So if you have 200 rupees, which is about $3, then there are publishers in India to publish that paper. The main problem that it has created is, it's not just about money. There are a lot of publishers in India to publish papers. See, we call them predatory. It's very difficult for me to actually draw a line between good and predatory journals. See, for example, there is one publisher publishing something about 40 journals, and in 2023 alone, they have published more than 275,000 papers. Okay? One publisher. So 275,000 papers means you need to at least have 275,000 reviewers, okay, if it is a peer-reviewed journal. Okay. If you go for double-blind review, the number should be going high. So nobody verifies that publisher has a huge database of more than 500,000 experts in different fields of studies. Just because the papers, some of the papers that go in to that group of a large number of papers that go into publishers platform, get cited. So we think that they are good journals. So some of my students who have only 200 rupees, $3, they are sending their papers to a small publisher. In India, journal publishing has become a cottage industry now. Everybody is ready. Thanks to PKP kind of initiatives, we have free software, so we can host it, and then we can actually lure the people who wants to publish their papers, and for various reasons, 200 rupees, 100 rupees, $1, $2, half a dollar. So there are publishers to publish everything. So now when I say that 275,000 paper publishing publisher is a good publisher, and this small publisher in India is a predatory publisher, so I'm not able to accept that. So for me, sending a publishing, paying money to publish a paper itself is fundamentally a wrong idea. And this idea has taken nearly about 25 years of experimentation, yielding nothing, dividing the community, perpetuating the inequity, and even then, this idea was focused everywhere. The most difficult part of this author pay open access model is asking the authors to seek mercy. So I'm from India. I'm a poor scientist. Could you please waive off the publication fee for me? I couldn't imagine that. Our scientists are great people in our country. They are very well-respected people. They work hard. It's their knowledge. It's their experimental results. But finally, they have to go to a publisher in the Western Europe or North America or somewhere else and beg for mercy to get their papers published. It's completely demeaning. And everyone is publishing tons of papers in India. See, for example, I know many scholars. They are publishing papers every alternative day now. There are the individual counts of papers for individual authors are hundreds. Every year they are publishing hundreds of papers because these papers are getting accepted in some journals somewhere else. So they are able to produce papers of this number. The entire scholarly communication system is getting diluted. There are many more issues associated with this author pay model. I couldn't really understand how this author pay open access model got so much prominence, and we have spent so much of time to experiment whether it will work or not. So in my opinion, if we want to actually place this diamond open access models to the prominent stage, clearly we have to say the author pay model is a bad idea because we have a lot of data now, we have enough evidence now, and all the attempts that we try to include publishers in the open access discussion have failed. And now we have to make a clear point. We cannot go by either way. This is okay, this is okay. It's not possible, particularly when it comes to when you would like to speak about diamond open access journals. We have to clearly say this model is devastating, dangerous, in many other, the harms that it brings should be highlighted by the open access advocacy or the community that advocates open access. This is one clear-cut example, clear-cut result of the 20 years of experiment is this the author pay model is a very, very bad idea, and we should try to find ways to stop this as quickly as possible. And we have to completely reject it. So in India, we have introduced a system called One Nation, One Subscription. It's a very old idea, clubbing libraries into the consortiums and bargain with publishers and provide access to the members. 40 years ago, one neurosurgeon, India's neurosurgeon, wrote about the access problem in the British Medical Journal, for nearly 40 years, 45 years ago. The publishers were not ready to distribute journals to the developing countries because they did not see it as a profitable market. Simply, our doctors, colleges, professors, students, they lived without access to any information. It was a pathetic condition when it comes to information access in India. Now, after 45 years, we are going to spend something around 750 million US dollars to provide access to somebody who would actually not use these journals. 45 years we waited, we accumulated wealth, and we pay this to a commercial publisher and now trying to provide access. In the meantime, one great thing happened is the internet. Our policy community and scientific community, everyone forgot comfortably. We can use the internet very cleverly and expand access. That is what actually the idea of open access initially. The open access means something is closed, something was under lock. That we have to actually open. So when it comes to diamond open access, it's easy for us. I think it's going open. So it's pretty easy. This is a kind of simple method. But the open access main objective is to open something which is under lock. That is where we have to actually focus more about. For example, the schemes that promoted author pay open access, converting all the journals into author pay journals. There are many initiatives, a lot of funds went in, and then they did a lot of experiments. All that has helped only to strengthen the publishers' hold in scholarly communication. They actually expanded the hybrid open access through hybrid journals. That is what has happened. In India, the argument, this is my slide. When I wrote this article, I presented the slide, and in the recent press conference by the principal scientific advisor to the government of India used it. And they say, take for example Elsevier, where still close to 60% of the papers are in closed access. So we have to provide access to those papers, so we have to spend money. What they failed is they did not even bargain for the amount of papers that are already open access. For example, if 30% of the papers are open access with a publisher, so you have to expect some 30% discount, right? So we should have paid much lesser than what we were paying, but instead we are paying 3 times more cost than what we used to pay to expand access to these set of peoples. Already, journal as a package. See, we are using articles. We are not using journals. In one journal, probably 1 or 2 articles might be used if it is a big organization. But we buy all the content, but we use very little. Hardly 20% of the content is used even in research-intensive universities in India. But we are paying for 100% of what the publishers produce at a huge cost, 3 times, 4 times more cost we pay than what we used to pay through this scheme. So this is actually, the confusion over what is open access, author pay model, all that created our Indian policymakers to go back to the old system than experimenting with the new models of open access publishing. So it's a kind of setback. This is what I would like to see after 20 years. So now we have to fight for the good policy, good science policy in India, and that is actually going on. But what I would like to say is the initiatives that included publishers to provide open access contents through their platforms actually helped only the publishers, not the others, is what I would like to again pinpoint here. The third point, India is known for diamond open access journals, let me call it now. When initial times, when open access journals, what I thought, that time the APCs, author pay systems were not available, or it was just coming. The Public Library of Science and Biomed Central Communities, they just introduced author pay journals for just $500 or less. The author pay charges were not this costly that time also. I thought, I imagined, or the professors who spoke about open access, what we discussed about the two routes of open access is, one is through repositories, another through is journals, which we meant is, by default, is diamond journals. Now, after 25 years, we are separating the diamond journals from some other journals, is what is actually surprising. Open access means there were two routes, open access repositories and open access journals, which we mean is, by default, we thought it's diamond, which we call it now. Even before the initiatives gaining momentum, when we talked about providing access to the contents of journals run by Indian scholarly societies, they immediately agreed, even before the Budapest Open Access Initiative came in. Leading journals in India, they made their content open access through web. They had no problem at all. Yeah, they had no problem at all. So we have very good journals. One example is the Medno. Medno was actually developed by one pediatrician. His name is D.K. Sagu. He started running this journal, and he helped these journals promote their visibility. He worked hard. He contacted societies, and he actually pioneered the fee-less free model. See, in that system, authors or readers need not to pay, but he could find some sustainable ways to run a journal through adding advertisements or charging for value-added copies of PDF and many other ways. But Walter Kluwer actually arm-twisted D.K. Sagu to made him to sell the company to them. And after that, D.K. Sagu is away from the field. And this is actually what happening. So when the mighty publishers come, even if there are small initiatives, small entrepreneurship comes in developing countries, it is not sure, we are not sure that they can sustain against the might of publishers is the problem that we faces here. And still, many of the journals that are part of Medno follow the same principles that set up by D.K. Sagu. There are journals, for example, the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. They are very particular that their journal need not to be indexed by the popular databases like Scopus and Web of Science, and they are determined that they don't want to send their copies, and they want to actually run their journal, and they have been successfully running journal. They are getting international recognition, very, very good respect, defying all the normal metrics that establishes the quality. There are journals that can survive against, and it's run by a good community of doctors at volunteers their time and run this journal for years together. There are many journals which are 50-year, 60-year-old journals that are already open access available in India. And this journal is running by crowdsourcing. You can donate money. It's completely independent. Any funding agencies, individuals can donate money. They don't charge authors or readers. And they have been successfully running it for more than 20, 25 years. So this is my last slide. And there are two views when it comes to evaluation, which actually dictates which way we have to make papers open access. The current principal scientific advisor to the government of India says that he would consider only the top papers published in top 1% of top 1% of the impact factor of the journals. He's very particular about that. Even if the papers that are published in the journals that are in lower pecking order, even if they are highly cited, he says that he would not agree to it. this was actually confirmed by another professor, Professor Balaram, who wrote an article, editorial a few years ago. He said, the highly cited articles in, not highly cited articles in high impact factor journals values better than the highly cited articles in low impact factor journals. This is actually the scenario. Both professors are working in one institution, that is Indian Institute of Science. Professor Balaram was the editor of, he was the director also, he was the editor of the journal Current Science. But there are two different views here. But the metrics, the metrics like impact factor are grossly misused by these scientific administrators. They don't have a basic understanding about what these impact factors are, why these were devised, and they are just bringing a tool that was meant for something else to measure scientists and others and create a kind of very, very difficult situation in research evaluation. This actually we have to really continue to fight against I would say the misuse or abuse of scholarly communication tools and indicators in research evaluation. So these are the focus areas. And finally, what I would like to say is, if the open access discussions would still want to include the for-profit large publishers into the discussion, the others will continue to be eliminated. So our solutions, open access solutions, should be independent of the for-profit publishers. They will take care of themselves. They have enormous amount of money and other things. And also what we have to take care is the community that is excluded by the for-profit publishers. With that, I would like to stop here, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
To get us quickly started, I will give up my time. I had my own 20 minutes to ask questions and give it to the audience to ask the questions for our panelists. So do we have any hands in the room? Yeah, there's lots of hands. We'll take them as stacks of 3 at a time. Luyolo, you can leave it there. They can stand next to the mic. We can form 3 here and then form 3 there. Please.
Should I give it a start? Hi, I'm Vincent from Punctum Books and Toad Open Metadata. Thank you for this absolutely wonderful starting panel of the day. I would like to thank the last speaker, Dr. Muthuku Maraswamy, for bringing up what I think, especially from a book perspective, is a very important point, which is the point of the back catalog. So we see currently in the open access book landscape that there are numerous large publishers developing funding models that are basically saying, we have a closed back catalog, but if you give us money, then we're going to fund open access publications for the future, and you will have, as funder, access, usually a library, access to this closed back catalog. And so what I see there is that you're basically using a back catalog that is closed and will remain closed as leverage to get funding for open access. Therefore, basically pushing true open access publishers out of the market who have a back catalog that is by nature open. And I think that we should really pay attention to this type of leveraging of closed access in order to claim a certain type of hybrid openness. So thank you for putting that in the discussion. Thank you. Yeah.
Lydia?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much to all the speakers for their excellent contributions. My question is more for Esther Juliana. I found your reflections excellent, and please don't feel guilty to be a philosophist in this forum. I think it really helps. In following that, because I think it's very good that you provide that background, that more theoretical background, if you like. And in this line, I would like to ask you, when you discuss the role of the institutions and the role of the citizens and how they trust or not the institutions and how this engages in a virtuous circle, have you found in your studies any links to democracy, democratic systems? So I would appreciate if you can add some reflections in this respect.
Thank you very much for the very enlightening presentations. So my question goes to Professor Kasturi. So in the sense of like disrupting systems and changing behaviors and changing cultures, systems are only giving power by people who consider the systems like work. So I always find it interesting to look also into the mentalities, because we need to disrupt our own mentalities. Some of that colonialism is being impeded, and part of that was also passed to other generations. So we now have people who experience hidden biases from their selves. It's not like embedded on that as well. So how do we label those traumas? How do we identify them and stop them from being passed to the next generation? And for Dr. Walid, why not have a second or third Diamond Open Access Summit in Doha, Qatar, for example? And my last question goes to Mr. Ramadan. So as a medical doctor, the medical community owes a lot to the journals and the journal clubs in India. They have been providing a lot when it comes to the medicine and the health sciences sector. But now seeing students create papers using AI, it helped a lot. And I thought a lot of that, AI created articles are rubbish until I've tried them myself. So AI helps students a lot in creating papers, and these are quality papers. It helps them identify previous readings and all of that, and also test their hypothesis. So in that sense, we're going to be seeing a lot of papers coming in the next few years. And how do we accommodate that in the sense that we have low interest in peer review? Do we change the systems? Do we get to the point where we have to sacrifice some of what we call our standards for good publication? Thank you.
We will go and try and answer this set of questions, and I will take the second round. Let me start with Kasturi, come to Juliana, and then Madani.
Hi. Hi, thank you so much for that question. I think it's a pertinent one, because sometimes when we're thinking about epistemologies, we forget that there is a self that needs to work through all the trauma, as you call it. In terms of labeling it, for me, it's still a colonial wound and a colonial trauma. It does not, I think it comes through genealogies over so many generations, that even what we see as the Gen Z generation, well, the Generation Z now say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't live in that time. I don't know. But they just have to look at where they live and look at the neighbors and look across the railway tracks, and that comes right home. So we can't escape it. The question is, how do we mediate it? And I think that number one, if we're working at an academic institution or any other institution, it is hugely triggering. So we don't walk into that space naive about what it can do. So as we disrupt, and I take your point, we need to disrupt ourselves all the time. It's a bi-directional, ongoing learning and healing the wound. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you very much for your question. I don't see you. But when... the thing is that democracy is an institution itself. So in democracy, we also need to trust as citizens in democracy as an institution and what democracy can provide for us as citizens. Actually, that's a very interesting question now that we think about the current situation of democracy around the world. I mean, especially in the, let's say, Western political countries, let's say. Because people don't trust democracy anymore. It's like democracy has lost the legitimidad. I don't remember how to say that word. So that's a big problem for political formation, for political education, and for political life, let's say. That this issue is not directly connected with open access and open science, but we can do the links still. Because if we believe that we can construct a collective, a community of science, that's also in the spirit of creating a democracy of knowledge. But at the same time, it is let's say, we have to trust democracy of knowledge as an institution itself as well. But how can we, that's more or less what I tried to say in my presentation, how can we trust something we don't know? we're not trained to understand. Then we cannot trust something just in something we don't understand. So that's more or less the thing I wanted to explain. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. With regard to the books which are in closed access and the publishers actually take a leverage to sell it by asking monies from libraries and they want to convert and sell. So for that, I think the libraries, academic libraries and public libraries should actually capitalize the local fair use facilities available in the copyright law. In our library, we are digitizing the entire library and make it available because we actually read the copyright and we try to interpret it in a different way. And we will digitize and we will make copies available for our users. Up to that point, it is okay. But the threat in the book side is slightly lesser when it comes to when you compare the journal articles and other things. They are even more serious problems associated with that communication. But here the libraries have a kind of say, so we can read the copyright law and then we can execute. See, big Google Books digitization projects have helped American libraries to store all their books in digital forms. So there still we have some power to actually defend that. That's what I think. So already we are publishing a lot more papers than what we can read when it comes to medical sciences. So it's going to increase. The one quality of science literature is that it's self-correction in nature. Automatically the bad science will go and settle at the bottom, and the good science will come to the cream, and people will use it. So this has been proved in the history of scholarly communication for over many years. Also, many ideas which are super hit for now may get obsolete tomorrow because the new ideas come and take over. So all that, the system of science and science communication will take care of it. So we don't want to worry much about the number goes up or something. So the community and its self-correcting nature will take care of it. This is what I think about the proliferation of literature. Thank you.
The question about hosting the, the summit. I believe the Arab States region would highly benefit from having a summit, a Diamond Open Access Summit in there. It will help the publishers understand and work better and getting their business models work, and would also allow us to have a better understanding of the landscape of publishing in the region. Just because it's not on Scopus or Web of Science or even DOAJ doesn't mean that there aren't journals out there. And I think having a summit there would definitely start the conversation and also encourage many to do better globally. Whether to have it in QNL or not, I'll ask Reggie for advice on how he got his got it here. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the last 4 questions. So to this side first, and then we'll go to that side.
Thank you. Dr. Alaweed Alkaya, thank you very much for your thought-provoking presentation. Open cultural heritage. South Africa has been amending its copyright legislation for close to a decade. It's a litigious space with contestation relating to intellectual property rights and the intention to make works available for reasonable public use in libraries for learning and research. While we must acknowledge the rights of individual holders, we have the situation that you raised in your presentation. How is Qatar navigating the tensions of open cultural heritage as a public good or as a common good against the individual rights and therefore being an impact factor for open access? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have two questions. One for the first one for the first speaker and the second one for the last speaker. What attracted me most in the first presentation was about the colonization of knowledge in Africa. What came to mind, specifically me, was the fact that while you were talking, I assumed that maybe South Africa is moving towards the colonization of knowledge. But in some African countries, some are still diving into, deep down inside. So where do you think could be the starting point for us to decolonize knowledge? And for the last speaker, sir, it's on Tuesday I presented here on SWOT analysis of impact factor. Based on my personal experience, right in my home country, which is Nigeria. Let me be specific about my home institution. The emphasis was much more on the reputation of a journal. Okay, predatory journal, no, we don't want it. While at the host institution in India, where I'm on my postdoc program, the emphasis is much more on impact factor. Your last statement got my attention, which is we should not abuse the issue of impact factor. How do we now marry the two in such a way that you don't abuse the issue of a journal being a predatory journal, at the same time consider not abusing impact factor? Just like somebody asked me when I presented on Tuesday that at what point or what factor do you consider a journal to be a predatory journal? So in a nutshell, how do you maintain an equilibrium between reputation of a journal and not abusing impact factor as authors? Thank you.
All right, thank you. My question is a follow-up to the last question from the National Library of South Africa for Qatar. You said, of course, the mission of national libraries are to open up, preserve heritage and open it up, which you are doing. I really want to know what you are doing with copyrighted materials that are copyrighted, not Creative Commons before now. How are you managing with the intellectual property, like she said? And then for all of you here, I want to, because all this while we've been talking about academic research, publication, except the first speaker and the keynote speaker, who appreciates that we have a lot of indigenous oral history that are not documented. Is there any support Diamond Open Access Initiative and promoters are giving to make sure that all these oral history, which are not documented, are being documented? Some of them, the owners of the knowledge cannot put it in writing, and they need support for them to transfer it to a readable format. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Chiamo Mutsapa, the director for the African Open Science Platform. I got to say I enjoyed the presentations today, starting yesterday on the decolonization topic, which I think resonates very well with the African context. First of all, let me congratulate Qatar for showing what's possible with resources, and also candidly sharing the difficulties, the practical difficulties when you deal with publishers to make this a reality. But firstly, let me say this. Decolonization is certainly multifaceted and multi-layered, and there's a very long history, as you know. But I think we can be purposeful and intentful, given that the UNESCO recommendations do talk of the need for dialogue with other knowledge systems. I personally think we need to move further, moving beyond talking, but doing open science with other knowledge systems. So I want to pose this to you. What do you think are possible ideas, maybe emanating from the discussions this week, of concrete projects that we can use as conduits for doing open science and building trust with these communities? You'll recall that in 2018, we hosted the International Data Week right here in Africa, in Botswana. And at the margins of that conference, we coined the CARE principles. We can do fair, but with care, isn't it? I would like to see a concrete project that advances the CARE principles. And I think we can be purposeful and intentful about this. We need mechanisms whereby we can co-design, co-create, co-implement projects with these communities, most of which are not here. I think it would be useful maybe leaving this conference to say maybe the Science Granting Council Initiative in Africa, which are the funders from countries in Africa, together with UNESCO, maybe with the ASP, and funders who are willing to come to the party. We coin a call that is very purposeful to say, in terms of this particular pillar of the UNESCO recommendations, this is some priority projects that we can do. I really congratulate the people from New Zealand and Australia. They are doing some things. I want to see in the next 5 years, here in Africa, to have such a project. There are some lessons from the IP community. You recall that some years ago, there was need for developing IP instruments. Things like geographical indications were developed, primarily to show the possibility that people who own knowledge can obviously accrue IP value out of that. So really what I'm calling for is a specific set of projects and priorities that we can use to advance that dialogue with other knowledge systems, beyond dialogue but doing things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siamo. We'll start in reverse. We'll start with you, Madani, and end with Kasturi.
So the question about the abuse of impact factors is, see, the impact factors were developed by a person to recruit journals for his database. His name was Garfield. Many of you may know about him. This had a very specific purpose. He wanted to develop tools so that libraries can find it easy to select journals. For example, if my school is starting if my university is starting a new school, and then I want to identify good journals in a particular field. So we need a tool, right? There are many journals. We need a tool to recruit, subscribe to it or taking license to it. This was the idea 100 years ago when, or 50 years ago, 70 years ago when the impact factor was developed. It has a very specific purpose, and it is not a full-fledged algorithm. That algorithm worked for him. He continued to use it. A method to select journals for a database is used to evaluate individual scientists. So you are using a tool that was developed for something else to evaluate the performance of a scientist is exactly what creating the problem. So the impact factor normally takes only 15 to 17% of the citations, particularly in the quick time, the next 2 years, to come out with a number. It doesn't count all the papers, it doesn't count all the citations that a journal is going to get. It's very temporary, it is dynamic, it will change. The impact factor for 1 year, it may be, for a journal may change the next year, it may go up and high, low. So we cannot take back the promotions accordingly. So this is what is the gross abuse is happening. But when it comes to journal selection for writing a paper, if you just read a couple of articles and go through the editor's capacity and their affiliation and so on, you'll be able to very easily understand a journal is good or bad. So we need not to actually go for impact factor or numbers to choose a right journal. Yeah.
I'd like to say first that I'm happy that the topic of open cultural heritage resonates with many here, because we're in this kind of situation where we're talking about opening up what's coming, but we forget what's already been published. In Qatar, we, of course, I mean, personally and from a National Library perspective, we would like to see some changes to the Qatar copyright law. It hasn't been updated since 2002. We've done a consultation, and we've seen that, for example, we would benefit from something like fair use, which many countries like the US or fair dealing in the UK would have, or like more exceptions for GLAMs, like galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, to have for using in copyrighted works, or even terminal access. Now, unfortunately, this is beyond our control on changing the law, but what's in our control is policies and procedures that we can do in QNL, in Qatar National Library. So first, say that we do respect copyright law. We will not use an in-copyright item unless there is a permission or there is some sort of evaluation. I'll come back to that in a second. But it's under control to identify what is in public domain and make sure that the metadata associated with the items reflect this. So whenever we can, it's our goal, and to ensure that we maximize the number of items that are that have the public domain or the right statements in there. Now, of course, the issue with many items is that we don't have clear metadata. We don't know who the copyright holder is. We don't know when it was published, we don't know if it was published. So we're in an issue where at one point we will need to take more of a risk management approach. And that's something that we are actively doing, trying to figure out what would be fair to do in the context of what is fairly used or fairly done elsewhere. On the question of oral history, I think that's extremely important. And there's a team in the library that is working on this. It's called the Family Documents Program, where we're working with families in Qatar and interviewing them, collecting documents, collecting even old passports, and etc. So this is very important for us.
Thank you so much. The question of how to decolonize knowledge in Africa is the conference theme for another engagement. It is such an important question, but I cannot do justice to it. I also want to state up front that I'm not an expert, and I don't claim to be. And my work in this has been driven by my need to understand the students that we are shaping for the next generation. And that is what drives my understanding of how I've been colonized, how I've internalized certain sense of being and who I am, that I can't even see the difference between what it has done to me and who I am. That's where the work starts. But the ultimate goal is to know why I'm at the university, what is the core business of the university, and how am I showing up to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasturi, for keeping it short and sweet. I know I'm putting everybody under pressure. I'm going to put you under more pressure. One line, closing statement, I mean literally one line, and then I need to get them to tea. I will start with Marie.
Thank you. Well, one line. Well, then I would just state again how committed we are to this continuous process, which we will, and it is a process. It's not an objective that you ultimately reach. It's something that we have to work continuously with. I would have liked to. Well, I know we're coming to tea. If I had had more time, I would have told you a little bit about the process that we have inside Norway with indigenous peoples of Norway that have been mistreated, stolen culture and language from them, and so forth. And we have our own processes going with that now, but that will be for another time. Yes, lots of work to do, and we're committed to being there throughout that journey.
Hope. I think these engagements give hope. Thank you.
I think when it comes with social justice, we have to ask questions of why are things the way they are, and not accept always the status quo, and always ask questions, because there's hope, but we need to work together on accomplishing the goals.
Julian?
Not easy for me as a philosopher to say one line. I will say that we have to rethink political action in this context. Yeah.
In my opinion, for open science or open access to thrive, I think we should stop radicalizing things and making, not expecting some flip-flopping and all. Rather, we have to build on what is already existing and include everyone in the system. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. When we started off this panel, we started with Kasturi again. I will remind you, she asked us, in order to decolonize, we need to remember, recenter, and reclaim. And in reclaiming is what Madana asked us. When we started off this open access movement, what did we mean? Are we changing our meaning, or we meant access to knowledge and contribution without paying? And of course, I think the explanation on what do we mean is knowledge is not a commodity to be bought and sold to the highest bidder, but a public good that should be shared by all. Thank you. You have 15 minutes for tea.